Many players just coming back from mobile probably wonder what was OSRS like before they played. The 6-year anniversary of OSRS just came and I thought it'd be a cool idea to go back a few years and see what OSRS was once like. Personally, you could find me playing Soul Split and near reality private servers months before OSRS came out, which of course led me to hear about the exciting news of a new 2007scape official server put out by Jagex. A petition quickly spread throughout the internet to bring back the old RuneScape. We can see that the game would never even exist if there wasn't 50,000 people at least voting on this petition. At 50,000 plus votes, we could see that the membership would be $15, the level of maintenance would be critical only, and nothing else. At 250,000 votes, there would be a small team, an additional membership of $5, and a basic level of maintenance. The petition did great with 449,000 different people voting yes to the new old school servers. Although the petition did not reach 500,000 votes, Jagex was generous and gave us the benefits of having 500,000 anyway. This would mean that the new servers got an additional dedicated development team, although it was only like 5 people. Mod Ash, anyone? A weekly level of maintenance, an anti-bot, anti-gold farming upgrade, and a regular membership polls to decide new content. One of the first things I want to talk about is how trading used to be different for the first couple years before the Grand Exchange came on February 26, 2015. The most populated area in the entire game was World 302 at the Varrock West Bank. At number 1, players would trade potions, unidentified herbs, and herblore secondaries. Number 2 was dragon hides, leathers, dragon bones, battle staffs, orbs, and food right in the doorway. Number 3 was med tier gear such as rune, dragon, and barrows. Just south a bit, number 4 was 3rd age armor under the balcony. 5 was high tier gear such as whips, mage books, furies, dragonfire shields, and God Wars dungeon items once they actually came into the game. Right next to the anvil, ores and smithing supplies were sold. Number 7, runes and mystic. Number 8, right in the pathway, glories, CB braces, and other jewelry were sold. Number 9 was miscellaneous items or other bank sales, or just noobs that didn't know where to go. They would stand in the bank and sell or buy their items. Number 10 was range, weapons, gear, and ammunition, such as D-hide armor, chin champas, rune knives. Number 11 is where all the clue scroll items were actually sold, and especially after the clue scroll update with mithril trimmed, iron trimmed, all that type of stuff, this place was booming. 90% of people would actually use a site called Zybez, and it was basically like an online auction house. You could buy and sell your items and look up graphs, look up any item in the game. It was the best way to do your trading. Personally, I really like Zybez. This is where I actually started to merch. You could buy raw lobsters for like $125 and then sell them in bulk for $140 because players didn't have all day to just stand there, or they can use the Grand Exchange and buy like 10,000 of some item in 1 second. A couple months before the Grand Exchange was released, and about a year after players began to get sick and tiresome of sitting there all day and trading, they actually added the trading post, which was similar to Zybez but an in-game version. You would look up a Bandos chestplate, and then you would see that some guy's trying to sell it for 13.8 mil. You would then PM them and try to go meet up with them and buy it. The first big update that came to OSRS was Nightmare Zone. At this stage, Jagex mainly took their old content and reused it. That's why Nightmare Zone is a KBD layer with a whole bunch of quest bosses. Before the iconic Nightmare Zone update, nothing has really been changed besides Sea Slug Menace coming to the game, which was a better form of the Initiate armor on March 5th, 2013, as well as Jagex coding the agility obstacles so multiple people could actually go through the same obstacle at one time. While doing the Gnome Stronghold agility course, many players would have to sit at the pipe minutes on end and was quite frustrating. Moving on to October 17th, 2013, possibly one of the biggest updates that affected everything for what the game is now, the release of God Wars Dungeon. The poll actually passed with 89%, but many players were worried about a potential power creep, which would then come into the game. Although Jagex knew a power creep was inevitable, it most likely was a smart idea for them to introduce God Wars Dungeon because some high-level players were already getting bored. I mean, all the bosses you really could kill were Barrows, Dagonoth Kings, and Chaos Elemental. There really wasn't much endgame content at all. There was also different death mechanics back in the day, although some players complained about it, and there was quite a bit of DDoS attacks towards Jagex. Back in the day, items would show up in just a few minutes, allowing players to loot other players' loot piles. which was, extremely shitty if you died. But if you found someone, like, you're going to a Slayer task, you would potentially see a big ass loot pile on the ground. On November 21st, 2013, one of the largest polls had now entered the game, mainly focused around the new Slayer updates that would come to the game shortly after. On December 12th, 2013, the Slayer update did finally come, introducing broad bolts, Slayer helmet, Slayer points, skippable task, and much more. Before this, there was no skips, no extend to a task, no herb sack, no recolor Slayer helmet. There really wasn't much, and the hardest monster to actually kill was at 85 Abyssal Demons. I believe Jagex quickly saw that OSRS was an amazing game, but was lacking end-term content, especially for the players that would game out 10 hours a day. There really wasn't anything to achieve besides a skill cape. Rooftop agility courses came on December 5th, along with full graceful and stamina pots as well. These agility rooftops were made and created by a player named Japan to make agility a bit less dreadful. Instead of cleaning the grimy herbs that we do see nowadays, there was actually units back in the day, which means you couldn't even, decipher which type of herb it was. It could have been a Raynar and some guy scams you with a Guam. There was a lot of scams that took place back in the day with people buying herbs. Not to mention all the scams and lures that used to take place back in the day because most players were totally unaware of what was going on. Just going off the top of my head, I can think about the Tortoise scam, the Cannon scam, the Pridge Temple of Ikov scam, the Yuri Clue Scroll scam, the Fight Arena scam. That one was so freaking clever. I've seen just like 10 billion loot compilations from that. Not to mention the door closing scam. They would normally find someone doing a high risk, PvP fight, take them a few squares away from a door, 20 people log in. There's actually so many people using the consecutive action to open the door that it would make it almost impossible to get through to safety. On the 13th of March 2014, Wilderness Rejuvenation was added to the game. Prior to this, the whole wilderness was absolutely dead, besides maybe 100 players max fighting in Edgeville. With the recent God Wars Dungeon and Slayer update, many players felt that Jagex was leaning towards the PvM monster side of the game, and they wanted to fulfill the PKers' expectations. Before this update, the only reason to go deep wilderness was to get your mage arena cape, maybe kill some green dragons, or do KBD. With the wilderness rejuvenation, they added 3 more rune rocks to the ice plateau, a rune fountain, which you guys know what that is. You can get the eternal glory, do free alchemy and any type of spell that you wish. They also added 3 new demi bosses, Scorpia, Craze Archaeologist, and the Chaos Fanatic. On top of that, they added 3 new bosses as well, the Callisto Bear, the Venenotus Spider, and the Vedion. They also added the Wilderness God Wars Dungeon, which of course have Aviancies, Ecumenical Keys, Dragon Boots, and many players go there for their Slayer task. Along with this update, they actually took out Red Dragons out of the Red Dragon Isle in the Wilderness and put Lava Dragons as well, which has been a huge hit ever since. We can also see that Revenant was added to this poll as well, but did fail at 68%. Along with this exact update, they added Loot Broadcast, the Calphite Queen, King Black Dragon, and the Dagonoth Kings. Before this, if you were to kill any boss, you wouldn't even see the loot in your chat box or a KC at all. There's also a question on the same poll, should we add 24 more bank spaces to everyone's bank? And it passed with 98%. Even after this large wilderness rejuvenation update, there was many players that did not PK and mainly stayed to slaying monsters. Along with boss pets being added to the game, they also changed the spawn times. This update did come into the game on July 14th, 2014. Before this time, every single spawn in the game, whether it's a tree or a monster, was based on how many players were actually in that world at that current time. Of course, we cannot forget about February 26, 2015, when the Grand Exchange was added to the game. This changed almost everything. Around this time in OSRS, you would find about 10,000 players online at one time and a max of 20,000, but with the release of GE, the player base almost doubled as many players did come back. Most players were sick of power mining iron to train up their mining level, so they did add Motherlode Mine in mid-March 2014. Many players enjoyed taking a break from Slayer and doing hard clue scrolls, so Jagex added elite clue scrolls with some new clue scroll rewards. About 2 weeks after the boss pets were added, Bounty Hunter was added to the wild. Many players felt there wasn't much of a need to go PKing, along with you getting frozen for your fire cape or torso, which would lay on the ground. You have 1 minute to pick it up. Many trolls found it fun to freeze these people and actually make them lose their untradables that they spent hours getting. Although some felt that Bounty Hunter would turn into Bounty Hunter Crater, which they feared for from the past, which, ruined the wilderness back in the day, it turned out to be a pretty good update with emblems and the Bounty Hunter store being added in game. Shortly after Bounty Hunter was released, two of the biggest updates that have ever came to the game were released. The first being Corp Beast, which drops the sigils and the spirit shields. Many players, including myself, were extremely excited for the new wealth and a harder boss than God War's Dungeon. Once the prices of the spirit shield stabled out, the Elysian was roughly 650 mil, Arcane was 45 mil, and the Spectral being 30 mil because no Cerberus was in the game. There was really not much of a point to actually use these spirit shields besides the Elysian. The second big update of that month being Iron Man mode. This opened new doors for the player base, as many people never even thought about playing in Iron Man mode, a self-sufficient. I mean, everyone back in the day was still so newbie. Rarely you would see a 120 combat. And people were just trying to level up and play the game how they used to play, so Iron Man mode was really something new. The months following included updates such as Zulrah, the Dragon Defender, free to play, and the Achievement Diaries. At this time, Zulrah was considered the hardest boss in game. Many players would spend days without even killing it, and they would go in with a full inventory of brews just trying to understand the mechanics. At this stage in the game, many players were becoming aware that the game would never be the 2007 version. It actually used to be called 2007scape for a year or two before OSRS. There was a lot more longevity achievements to strive after, even though the game was becoming less and less like its 2006-2007 version that players once knew. As we move on to 2015, such updates such as a Skill Cape Perks, Abyssal Sire, Dragon Warhammer, Zaya release, Monkey Madness 2, Woodcutting Guild, Skatizo, Winter Todd, Hardcore Iron Man, and the Raids 1 Chambers of Exaric came to the game. This is quite an opinionated statement, but I would say the best update of this entire year for the game's growth and popularity was the first ever Deadman Mode server. The first ever Deadman was a lot different than it is nowadays, with XP rates being 5 times, PvP everywhere except certain banks, and if you kill someone you get 28 of their most valuable items from the bank. This caught a lot of people's attention. Nowadays only a few thousand players actually play in the tournament and the seasonal Deadman, but back in the day it was everything. It was the biggest hype ever, probably like 20,000 players online at all time in the Deadman Mode servers. If you did get PK'd and died to another player, you would actually lose half your XP. With these servers being such new content, players would play for months and months on end and not even get bored. You could see a level 65 still playing months in, he would die, rebuild, die, rebuild, die, rebuild. He just keep going and going. No one ever stopped or, was like, oh man, I've died so many times. And back then in Deadman, there was no grand exchange, so players would sit there for hours trading, and they actually had it so you could attack people outside the safe zone. Those are my first few videos that ever took off. The Deadman servers were actually released before the grand exchange was, so players would spend hours at Varrock West trading. At this point in 2016, many of the nostalgic OSRS updates have came, and we are left with a more modern OSRS. If you have been playing since the early OSRS days, you may have mixed feelings just like I do, but overall, I honestly want to say that this game is better than what it was. There is so many things to do in the game. You can never get bored. I personally think I could play for the next year or two and still not experience everything that the game has to offer. If you have any opinions on how Jagex could have made the upbringing of OSRS better, or what they can do to make the future of the game more sufficient, feel free to comment below. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. It was really nostalgic and fun making. Hope each and every one of you have a good day on the scape. See ya later.